The first documented use of the phrase United States of America is a letter from January 2nd, 1776. Stephen Moylan, a Continental Army aide to General George Washington, wrote to Joseph Reed, Washington's aide-de camp, seeking to go with full and ample powers from the United States of America to Spain to seek assistance in the Revolutionary War effort. The first known public usage is an anonymous essay published in the Williamsburg newspaper, the Virginia Gazette, on April 6, 1776. By June 1776, the United States of America appeared in the Articles of Confederation and the Declaration of Independence. The Second Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence on July 4, 1776. The term United States and the initialism U.S., used as nouns or as adjectives in English, are common short names for the country. The initialism USA, a noun, is also common. United States and U.S. are the established terms throughout the U.S. federal government, with prescribed rules. P. The States is an established colloquial shortening of the name, used particularly from abroad. Stateside is the corresponding adjective or adverb. America is the feminine form of the first word of Americas Vespucius, the Latinized name of Italian explorer Amerigo Vespucci 1454 to 1512. It was first used as a place name by the German cartographers Martin Wald Seemuller and Matthias Ringman in 1507. Q. Vespucci first proposed that the West Indies discovered by Christopher Columbus in 1492 were part of a previously unknown landmass and not among the Indies at the eastern limit of Asia. In English, the term America rarely refers to topics unrelated to the United States, despite the usage of the Americas to describe the totality of North and South America. The first inhabitants of North America migrated from Siberia over 12,000 years ago, either across the Bering Land Bridge or along the now submerged Ice Age coastline. The Clovis culture, which appeared around 11,000 BC, is believed to be the first widespread culture in the Americas. Over time, indigenous North American cultures grew increasingly sophisticated, and some, such as the Mississippian culture, developed agriculture, architecture, and complex societies. In the post-Archaic period, the Mississippian cultures were located in the Midwestern, Eastern, and Southern regions, and the Algonquian in the Great Lakes region and along the eastern seaboard, while the Hohokam culture and ancestral Puebloans inhabited the Southwest. 40 to native population. Estimates of what is now the United States before the arrival of European immigrants range from around 500,000 to nearly 10 million. European exploration, colonization, and conflict 1513 to 1765 main articles, colonial history of the United States and colonial American military history. The 1750 colonial possessions of Britain in pink and purple, France in blue, and Spain in orange in present-day Canada, and the United States Christopher Columbus began exploring the Caribbean for Spain in 1492, leading to Spanish-speaking settlements and missions from Puerto Rico and Florida to New Mexico and California. The first Spanish colony in what is now the continental United States was Spanish Florida, chartered in 1513. After several settlements failed there due to hunger and disease, Spain's first permanent town, St. Augustine, was founded in 1565. France established its own settlements in French Florida in 1562, but they were either abandoned Charlesfort, 1578, or destroyed by Spanish raids Fort Caroline. 1565, permanent French settlements would be founded much later along the Great Lakes. Fort Detroit, 1701, the Mississippi River, St. Louis, 1764, and especially the Gulf of Mexico, New Orleans. Early European colonies also included the thriving Dutch colony of New Netherland, settled 1626, present-day New York, and the small Swedish colony of New Sweden, settled 1638 in what is now Delaware. British colonization of the East Coast began with the Virginia colony 1607 and the Plymouth colony, Massachusetts, 1620. The Mayflower Compact in Massachusetts and the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut established precedents for representative self-governance and constitutionalism that would develop throughout the American colonies. 50 for 55, while European settlers in what is now the United States experienced conflicts with Native Americans, they also engaged in trade, exchanging European tools for food and animal pelts. Relations ranged from close cooperation to warfare and massacres. The colonial authorities often pursued policies that forced Native Americans to adopt European lifestyles, including conversion to Christianity. Along the eastern seaboard, settlers trafficked African slaves through the Atlantic slave trade. The original 13 colonies that would later found the United States were administered as possessions of Great Britain and had local governments with elections open to most white male property owners. The colonial population grew rapidly from Maine to Georgia, eclipsing Native American populations by the 1770s. The natural increase of the population was such that only a small minority of Americans had been born overseas. The colony's distance from Britain allowed for the development of self-governance and the First Great Awakening, a series of Christian revivals, fueled colonial interest in religious liberty. American Revolution and the Early Republic 1765 to 1800. Main articles: History of the United States 1776 to 1789. History of the United States 1789 to 1815. An American Revolution caption Declaration of Independence. A portrait by John Trumbull depicting the Committee of Five presenting the draft of the Declaration to the Continental Congress on June 28, 1776, in Philadelphia following their victory in the French and Indian War. Britain began to assert greater control over local colonial affairs, resulting in colonial political resistance. One of the primary colonial grievances was a denial of their rights as Englishmen, particularly the right to representation in the British. To demonstrate their dissatisfaction and resolve, the First Continental Congress met in 1774 and passed the Continental Association, a colonial boycott of British goods that proved effective. The British attempt to then disarm the colonists resulted in the 1775 battles of Lexington and Concord, igniting the American Revolutionary War. At the Second Continental Congress, the colonies appointed George Washington commander-in-chief of the Continental Army and created a committee that named Thomas Jefferson to draft the Declaration of Independence. 2 days after passing the Lee Resolution to create an independent nation, the Declaration was adopted on July 4, 1776. The political values of the American Revolution included liberty, inalienable individual rights, and the sovereignty of the people, supporting republicanism and rejecting monarchy, aristocracy, and all hereditary political power, civic virtue, and vilification of political corruption. 72. The Founding Fathers of the United States, who included Washington, Jefferson, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, James Madison, Thomas Paine, and many others, were inspired by Greco-Roman, Renaissance, and Enlightenment philosophies and ideas. The Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union were ratified in 1781 and established a decentralized government that operated until 1789. After the British surrender at the Siege of Yorktown in 1781, American sovereignty was internationally recognized by the Treaty of Paris, 1783, through which the U.S. gained territory stretching west to the Mississippi River, north to present-day Canada, and south to Spanish Florida. The Northwest Ordinance 1787 established the precedent by which the country's territory would expand with the admission of new states, rather than the expansion of existing states. The U.S. Constitution was drafted at the 1787 Constitutional Convention to overcome the limitations of the Articles. It went into effect in 1789, creating a federal republic governed by 3 separate branches that together ensured a system of checks and balances. George Washington was elected the country's first president under the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights was adopted in 1791 to allay skeptics' concerns about the power of the more centralized government. His resignation as commander-in-chief after the Revolutionary War and his later refusal to run for a third term as the country's first president established a precedent for the supremacy of civil authority in the United States and the peaceful transfer of power. Westward expansion and Civil War 1800 to 1865 main articles. History of the United States 1815 to 1849 and History of the United States 1849 to 1865. Historical territorial expansion of the United States. Division of the states during the American Civil War. Union states, border states. Confederate states. Territory Est Louisiana Purchase of 1803 from France nearly doubled the territory of the United States. Lingering issues with Britain remained, leading to the War of 1812, which was fought to a draw. Spain ceded Florida and its Gulf Coast territory in 1819. In the late 18th century, American settlers began to expand westward, many with a sense of manifest destiny. The compromise further prohibited slavery in all other lands of the Louisiana Purchase north of the 3,630 parallel. 89, as Americans expanded further into land inhabited by Native Americans. The federal government often applied policies of Indian removal or assimilation. 1991, the most significant removal legislation in U.S. history was the Indian Removal Act of 1830. It culminated in the Trail of Tears 1830 to 1850, in which an estimated 60,000 Native Americans living east of the Mississippi River were forcibly removed and displaced to lands far to the west. The Trail of Tears resulted in anywhere from 13,200 to 16,700 deaths. These and earlier organized displacements prompted a long series of American Indian wars west of the Mississippi. The Republic of Texas was annexed in 1845, and the 1846 Oregon Treaty led to U.S. control of the present-day American Northwest. 96. Victory in the Mexican-American War resulted in the 1848 Mexican cession of California, Nevada, Utah, and much of present-day Colorado and the American Southwest. The California Gold Rush of 1848 to 1849 spurred a huge migration of white settlers to the Pacific coast, leading to even more confrontations with native populations. One of the most violent, the California genocide of thousands of native inhabitants, lasted into the early 1870s, just as additional Western territories and states were created. During the colonial period, slavery had been legal in the American colonies, though the practice began to be significantly questioned during the American Revolution. 100. Spurred by an active abolitionist movement that had reemerged in the 1830s, states in the North enacted anti-slavery laws. 101. At the same time, support for slavery had strengthened in southern states with inventions such as the cotton gin, 1793, which had long made the institution profitable for southern elites. Throughout the 1850s, this sectional conflict regarding slavery was further inflamed by legislation in Congress and decisions of the Supreme Court. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 effectively gutted the anti-slavery requirements of the Missouri Compromise. These events exacerbated tensions between North and South that would culminate in the American Civil War 1861 to 1865. War broke out in April 1861 after the Confederates bombarded Fort Sumter. After the January 1863 Emancipation Proclamation, many freed slaves joined the Union Army. The war began to turn in the Union's favor following the 1863 Siege of Vicksburg and Battle of Gettysburg, and the Confederacy surrendered in 1865 after the Union's victory in the Battle of Appomattox. Courthouse. The Reconstruction era followed the war. After the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln, Reconstruction amendments were passed to protect the rights of African Americans. National infrastructure, including transcontinental telegraph and railroads, spurred growth in the American frontier. Post-Civil War era 1865 to 1917, Maine article, History of the United States 1865 to 1917, duration, 2 minutes and 27 seconds. To 27, an Edison Studios film showing immigrants arriving at Ellis Island in New York Harbor, a major point of entry for European immigrants in the late 19th and early 20th centuries from 1865 through 1917. An unprecedented stream of immigrants arrived in the United States, including 20 for point. Most came through the port of New York City, and New York City and other large cities on the East Coast became home to large Jewish, Irish, and Italian populations, while many Germans and Central Europeans moved to the Midwest. At the same time, about 1 million French Canadians migrated from Quebec to New England. 118. During the Great Migration, millions of African Americans left the rural South for urban areas in the North. Alaska was purchased from Russia in 1867. The Compromise of 1877 effectively ended Reconstruction, and white supremacists took local control of Southern politics. African Americans endured a period of heightened, overt racism following Reconstruction, a time often called the nadir of American race relations. A series of Supreme Court decisions, including Plessy v. Ferguson, emptied the 14th and 15th Amendments of their force, allowing Jim Crow laws in the South to remain unchecked. Sundown towns in the Midwest, and segregation in communities across the country, which would be reinforced by the policy of redlining later adopted by the Federal Homeowners Loan Corporation. An explosion of technological advancement accompanied by the exploitation of cheap immigrant labor led to rapid economic expansion during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, allowing the United States to outpace the economies of England, France, and Germany combined. This fostered the amassing of power by a few prominent industrialists, largely by their formation of trusts and monopolies to prevent competition. Tycoons led the nation's expansion in the railroad, petroleum, and steel industries. The United States emerged as a pioneer of the automotive industry. These changes were accompanied by significant increases in economic inequality, slum conditions, and social unrest, creating the environment for labor unions to begin to flourish. This period eventually ended with the advent of the Progressive Era, which was characterized by significant reforms. Pro-American elements in Hawaii overthrew the Hawaiian monarchy. The islands were annexed in 1898. That same year, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and Guam were ceded to the U.S. by Spain after the latter's defeat in the Spanish-American War. The Philippines was granted full independence from the U.S. on July 4, 1946. Following World War II, Puerto Rico and Guam have remained U.S. territories. American Samoa was acquired by the United States in 1900 after the Second Samoan Civil War. The U.S. Virgin Islands were purchased from Denmark in 1917. Rise as a superpower 191719 for 5. Main article, History of the United States, 1917 to 1945, the 1945 Trinity nuclear test, part of the Manhattan Project and the first detonation of a nuclear weapon. The two world wars permanently ended a national policy of U.S. isolationism and left the United States as a superpower. The United States entered World War I alongside the Allies, helping to turn the tide against the Central Powers. In 1920, a constitutional amendment granted nationwide women's suffrage. 140. During the 1920s and 30s, radio for mass communication and the invention of early television transformed communications nationwide. The Wall Street crash of 1929 triggered the Great Depression, which President Franklin D. Roosevelt responded to with the New Deal. A series of sweeping programs and public works projects combined with financial reforms and regulations. All were intended to protect against future economic depressions. Initially neutral during World War II, the U.S. began supplying war materiel to the Allies of World War II in March 1941 and entered the war in December after the Empire of Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor. The U.S. developed the first nuclear weapons and used them against the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945, ending the war. The United States was one of the four policemen who met to plan the post-war world alongside the United Kingdom, Soviet Union, and China. The U.S. emerged relatively unscathed from the war, with even greater economic power and international political influence. Cold War 1945 to 1991, History of the United States, 1945 to 1964, History of the United States, 1964 to 1980, and History of the United States, 1980 to 1991, Mikhail Gorbachev and Ronald Reagan signed the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty at the White House in 1987. After World War II, the United States entered the Cold War, where geopolitical tensions between the U.S. and the Soviet Union led the two countries to dominate world affairs. The U.S. utilized the policy of containment to limit the USSR's sphere of influence and prevailed in the space race, which culminated with the first crewed moon landing in 1969. Domestically, the U.S. experienced economic growth, urbanization, and population growth following World War II. The civil rights movement emerged, with Martin Luther King Jr. becoming a prominent leader in the early 1960s. The Great Society plan of President Lyndon B. Johnson's administration resulted in groundbreaking and broad-reaching laws, policies, and a constitutional amendment to counteract some of the worst effects of lingering institutional racism. The counterculture movement in the U.S. brought significant social changes, including the liberalization of attitudes toward recreational drug use and sexuality. It also encouraged open defiance of the military draft, leading to the end of conscription in 1973 and wide opposition to U.S. intervention in Vietnam, with the U.S. totally withdrawing in 1975. A societal shift in the roles of women was significantly responsible for the large increase in female paid labor participation during the 1970s, and by 1985 the majority of American women aged 16 and older were employed. The late 1980s and early 1990s saw the fall of communism and the collapse of the Soviet Union, which marked the end of the Cold War and left the United States as the world's sole superpower. Contemporary 1991 present. Main articles: History of the United States, 1991 to 2008, and History of the United States to 008 present. The Twin Towers in New York City during the September 11th attacks in 2001. The 1990s saw the longest recorded economic expansion in American history, a dramatic decline in U.S. crime rates, and advances in technology. Throughout this decade, technological innovations such as the World Wide Web, the evolution of the Pentium microprocessor in accordance with Moore's Law, rechargeable lithium-ion batteries, the first gene therapy trial, and cloning either emerged in the U.S. or were improved upon there. The Human Genome Project was formally launched in 1990, while NASDAQ became the first stock market in the United States to trade online in 1998. In the Gulf War of 1991, an American-led international coalition of states expelled an Iraqi invasion force that had occupied neighboring Kuwait. The September 11th attacks on the United States in 2001 by the pan-Islamist militant organization Al-Qaeda led to the War on Terror and subsequent military interventions in Afghanistan and Iraq. The U.S. housing bubble culminated in 2007 with the Great Recession, the largest economic contraction since the Great Depression. Coming to a head in the 2010s, political polarization in the country increased between liberal and conservative factions. This polarization was capitalized upon in the January 2021 Capitol attack, when a mob of insurrectionists entered the U.S. Capitol and sought to prevent the peaceful transfer of power in an attempted S-11 coup d'etat. In May-August 2021, the 2021 Taliban offensive ended the war in Afghanistan, 1 year after the United States-Taliban deal. Geography of the United States. A topographic map of the United States. The United States is the world's third largest country by total area behind Russia and Canada. D. The 48 contiguous states and the District of Columbia occupy a combined area of 3,119,885 square miles, 8,080,470 square kilometers. The coastal plain of the Atlantic seaboard gives way to inland forests and rolling hills in the Piedmont Plateau region. The Appalachian Mountains and the Adirondack Massif separate the East Coast from the Great Lakes and the grasslands of the Midwest. The Mississippi River System, the world's fourth longest river system, runs predominantly north-south through the heart of the country. The flat and fertile prairie of the Great Plains stretches to the west, interrupted by a highland region in the southeast. The Grand Canyon and Arizona, the Rocky Mountains, west of the Great Plains, extend north to south across the country, peaking at over 14,000 feet for 1,300 meters in Colorado. Farther west are the Rocky Great Basin and Chihuahua, Sonoran, and Mojave deserts. In the northwest corner of Arizona, carved by the Colorado River over millions of years, is the Grand Canyon, a steep-sided canyon and popular tourist destination known for its overwhelming visual size and intricate, colorful landscape. The Sierra Nevada and Cascade mountain ranges run close to the Pacific coast. The lowest and highest points in the contiguous United States are in the state of California, 188, about 84 miles, 135 kilometers apart, at an elevation of 20,310 feet, 6,190.5 meters. Alaska's Denali is the highest peak in the country and continent. Active volcanoes are common throughout Alaska's Alexander and Aleutian Islands, and Hawaii consists of volcanic islands. The supervolcano underlying Yellowstone National Park in the Rocky Mountains, the Yellowstone Caldera, is the continent's largest volcanic feature. In 2021, the United States had 8% of global permanent meadows and pastures and 10% of cropland. Climate Maine article, Climate of the United States. Climate types of the United States with its large size and geographic variety. The United States includes most climate types. East of the 100th meridian, the climate ranges from humid continental in the north to humid subtropical in the south. The western Great Plains are semi-arid. Many mountainous areas of the American West have an alpine climate. The climate is arid in the southwest, Mediterranean in coastal California, and oceanic in coastal Oregon, Washington, and southern Alaska. Most of Alaska is subarctic or polar. Hawaii, the southern tip of Florida, and U.S. territories in the Caribbean and Pacific are tropical. States bordering the Gulf of Mexico are prone to hurricanes, and most of the world's tornadoes occur in the country, mainly in Tornado Alley. 196. Overall, the United States receives more high-impact extreme weather incidents than any other country. 197. 198. Extreme weather became more frequent in the U.S. in the 21st century, with 3 times the number of reported heat waves as in the 1960s. In the American Southwest, droughts became more persistent and more severe. The regions considered as the most attractive to the population are the most vulnerable. Biodiversity and Conservation Maine articles, Fauna of the United States and Flora of the United States. A bald eagle, the national emblem of the United States since 1782 and officially declared the national bird in 2024. The U.S. is one of 17 megadiverse countries containing large numbers of endemic species. About 17,000 species of vascular plants occur in the contiguous United States and Alaska, and over 1,800 species of flowering plants are found in Hawaii, few of which occur on the mainland. The United States is home to 428 mammal species, 780 for birds, 311 reptiles, 295 amphibians, and around 91,000 insect species. There are 63 national parks and hundreds of other federally managed parks, forests, and wilderness areas managed by the National Park Service and other agencies. About 28% of the country's land is publicly owned and federally managed, primarily in the western states. Most of this land is protected, though some is leased for commercial use, and less than 1% is used for military purposes. Environmental issues in the United States include debates on non-renewable resources and nuclear energy, air and water pollution, biodiversity, logging and deforestation, and climate change. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, is the federal agency charged with addressing most environmental-related issues. The idea of wilderness has shaped the management of public lands since 1964, with the Wilderness Act. The Endangered Species Act of 1973 provides a way to protect threatened and endangered species and their habitats. The United States Fish and Wildlife Service implements and enforces the act. In 2024, the U.S. ranked 35th among 180 countries in the Environmental Performance Index. Government and politics of the United States U.S. Capitol building, the seat of legislative government, is home to both chambers of the U.S. Congress, the Senate in left wing of building, and the House of Representatives right wing. The White House, the residence and workplace of the U.S. President, and the offices of the Presidential Staff Supreme Court building, which houses the nation's highest court. The United States is a federal republic of 50 states and a separate federal capital district, Washington, D.C. It also asserts sovereignty over 5 unincorporated territories and several uninhabited island possessions. The U.S. is the world's oldest surviving federation, 219, and its presidential system of national government has been adopted, in whole or in part, by many newly independent states worldwide following their decolonization. It is a liberal representative democracy in which majority rule is tempered by minority rights protected by law. The Constitution of the United States serves as the country's supreme legal document. National government, federal government of the United States composed of 3 branches, all headquartered in Washington, D.C. The federal government is the national government of the United States. It is regulated by a strong system of checks and balances. The U.S. Congress, a bicameral legislature made up of the Senate and the House of Representatives, makes federal law, declares war, approves treaties, has the power of the purse, 224, and has the power of impeachment, 225. The Senate has 100 members from each state, elected for a 6-year term. The House of Representatives has 435 members, each elected for a 2-year term. All representatives serve 1 congressional district of equivalent population. Congressional districts are drawn by each state legislature and are contiguous within the state. The Congress also organizes a collection of committees, each of which handles a specific task or duty. One of Congress's foremost non-legislative functions is the power to investigate and oversee the executive branch. Congressional oversight is usually delegated to committees and is facilitated by Congress's subpoena power. The U.S. President is the head of state, commander-in-chief of the military, chief executive of the federal government, and has the ability to veto legislative bills from the U.S. Congress before they become law. However, presidential vetoes can be overridden by a 2/3 supermajority vote in both chambers of Congress. The president appoints the members of the cabinet, subject to Senate approval, and names other officials who administer and enforce federal laws through their respective agencies. 229. The president also has clemency power for federal crimes and can issue pardons. Finally, the president has the right to issue expansive executive orders subject to judicial review in a number of policy areas. Candidates for president campaign with a vice presidential running mate. Both candidates are elected together or defeated together in a presidential election. Unlike other votes in American politics, this is technically an indirect election in which the winner will be determined by the U.S. Electoral College. Their votes are officially cast by individual electors selected by their state legislature. In practice, however, each of the 50 states chooses a group of presidential electors who are required to confirm the winner of their state's popular vote. Each state is allocated to electors plus one additional elector for each congressional district, which in effect combines to equal the number of elected officials that state sends to Congress. The District of Columbia, with no representatives or senators, is allocated 3 electoral votes. Both the president and the vice president serve a 4-year term, and the president may be reelected to the office only once for 1 additional 4-year term. The U.S. federal judiciary, whose judges are all appointed for life by the president with Senate approval, consists primarily of the U.S. Supreme Court, the U.S. Courts of Appeals, and the U.S. District Courts. The U.S. Supreme Court interprets laws and overturns those they find unconstitutional. The Supreme Court has 9 members led by the Chief Justice of the United States. The members are appointed by the sitting president when a vacancy becomes available. The first level in the federal courts is Federal District Court for any case under original jurisdiction, such as federal statutes, the Constitution, or treaties. There are 12 federal circuits that divide the country into different regions for federal appeals courts. After a federal district court has decided a case, it can then be appealed to a United States Court of Appeal. The next and highest court in the system is the Supreme Court of the United States. The 3-branch system is known as the presidential system, in contrast to the parliamentary system, where the executive is part of the legislative body. Many countries around the world imitated this aspect of the 1789 Constitution of the United States, especially in the Americas. Political parties in the United States and list of political parties in the United States U.S. state governments, governor, and legislature by party control. As of 2024, Democratic control, Republican control split control constitution is silent on political parties. However, they developed independently in the 18th century with the Federalist and Anti-Federalist parties. Since then, the United States has operated as a de facto two-party system, though the parties in that system have been different at different times. The 2 main national parties are presently the Democratic and the Republican. The former is perceived as relatively liberal in its political platform, while the latter is perceived as relatively conservative. Subdivisions main articles: U.S. state, county United States, and territories of the United States in the American federal system. Sovereign powers are shared between 2 levels of elected government, national and state. People in the states are also represented by local elected governments, which are administrative divisions of the states. States are subdivided into counties or county equivalents and further divided into municipalities. The District of Columbia is a federal district containing the U.S. capital, Washington, D.C. The federal district is an administrative division of the federal government. Federally recognized tribes govern 326 Indian reservations. The United States has an established structure of foreign relations, and it has the world's 2nd largest diplomatic corps as of 2024. It is a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council and home to the United Nations headquarters. The United States is a member of the G7, G20, and OECD intergovernmental organizations. Almost all countries have embassies, and many have consulates, official representatives in the country. Likewise, nearly all countries host formal diplomatic missions with the United States, except Iran, North Korea, and Bhutan. Though Taiwan does not have formal diplomatic relations with the U.S., it maintains close unofficial relations. The United States regularly supplies Taiwan with military equipment to deter potential Chinese aggression. Its geopolitical attention also turned to the Indo-Pacific when the United States joined the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue with Australia, India, and Japan. The United States has a special relationship with the United Kingdom and strong ties with Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the Philippines, Japan, South Korea, Israel, and several European Union countries: France, Italy, Germany, Spain, and Poland. 260. The U.S. works closely with its NATO allies on military and national security issues. and with countries in the Americas through the Organization of American States and the United States-Mexico-Canada Free Trade Agreement. In South America, Colombia is traditionally considered to be the closest ally of the United States. The U.S. exercises full international defense authority and responsibility for Micronesia, the Marshall Islands, and Palau through the Compact of Free Association. It has increasingly conducted strategic cooperation with India, while its ties with China have steadily deteriorated. Since 2014, the U.S. has become a key ally of Ukraine. It has also provided the country with significant military equipment and other support in response to Russia's 2022 invasion. Military Maine article, United States Armed Forces Pentagon, the headquarters of the U.S. Department of Defense in Arlington County, Virginia, is one of the world's largest office buildings with over 6.5 million square feet, 600,000 square meters of floor space. The President is the Commander-in-Chief of the United States Armed Forces and appoints its leaders, the Secretary of Defense, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The Department of Defense, which is headquartered at the Pentagon near Washington, D.C., administers 5 of the 6 service branches, which are made up of the U.S. Army, Marine Corps, Navy, Air Force, and Space Force. The Coast Guard is administered by the Department of Homeland Security in peacetime and can be transferred to the Department of the Navy in wartime. The United States spent $916 billion on its military in 2023, which is by far the largest amount of any country, making up 37% of global military spending and accounting for 3.4% of the country. The U.S. possesses 42% of the world's nuclear weapons, the second largest share after Russia. The United States has the 3rd largest combined armed forces in the world, behind the Chinese People's Liberation Army and Indian Armed Forces. The military operates about 800 bases and facilities abroad, and maintains deployments greater than 100 active duty personnel in 25 foreign countries. State Defense Forces (SDFs) are military units that operate under the sole authority of a state government. SDFs are authorized by state and federal law, but are under the command of the state's governor. They are distinct from the state's National Guard units in that they cannot become federalized entities. A state's National Guard personnel, however, may be federalized under the National Defense Act amendments of 1933. Which created the Guard and provides for the integration of Army National Guard units and personnel into the U.S. Army, and since 1947, the U.S. Air Force. The U.S. has been the world's largest economy nominally since about 1890. The 2023 nominal U.S. gross domestic product (GDP) of more than $27 trillion was the highest in the world, constituting over 25% of the global economy, or 15% at purchasing power parity (PPP). From 1983 to 2008, U.S. real compounded annual GDP growth was 3.3%, compared to a 2.3% weighted average for the rest of the G7. The country ranks first in the world by nominal GDP, second when adjusted for purchasing power parities (PPP), 13, and 9th by PPP adjusted GDP per capita. It has the highest disposable household income per capita among OECD countries. As of February 2024, the total U.S. federal government debt is $34.4 trillion. Microsoft, the world's biggest company by market capitalization, has its global headquarters in Redmond, Washington, north of Seattle. Of the world's 500 largest companies by revenue, 136 are headquartered in the U.S. as of 2023, which is the highest number of any country. The U.S. dollar is the currency most used in international transactions and is the world's foremost reserve currency. Backed by the country's dominant economy, its military, the petrodollar system, and its linked eurodollar and large U.S. Treasuries market. Several countries use it as their official currency, and in others it is the de facto currency. The U.S. has free trade agreements with several countries, including the USMCA. It ranked second in the Global Competitiveness Report in 2019 after Singapore, Although the United States has reached a post-industrial level of development and is often described as having a service economy, it remains a major industrial power. As of 2021, the U.S. is the second largest manufacturing country after China. The New York Stock Exchange on Wall Street, the world's largest stock exchange by market capitalization. New York City is the world's principal financial center and the epicenter of the world's largest metropolitan economy. The New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ, both located in New York City, are the world's two largest stock exchanges by market capitalization and trade volume. The United States is at or near the forefront of technological advancement and innovation in many economic fields, especially in artificial intelligence, electronics and computers, pharmaceuticals, and medical, aerospace, and military equipment. The country's economy is fueled by abundant natural resources, a well-developed infrastructure, and high productivity. The largest trading partners of the United States are the European Union, Mexico, Canada, China, Japan, South Korea, the United Kingdom, Vietnam, India. The United States is the world's largest importer and second largest exporter. It is by far the world's largest exporter of services. Americans have the highest average household and employee income among OECD member states, and the fourth highest median household income as of 2023, 320 up from sixth highest in 2013. With personal consumption expenditures of over $18.5 trillion in 2023, 322, the U.S. has a heavily consumer-driven economy and is by far the world's largest consumer market. Wealth in the United States is highly concentrated. The richest 10% of the adult population own 72% of the country's household wealth, while the bottom 50% own just 2%. Income inequality in the U.S. remains at record highs, with the top fifth of earners taking home more than half of all income and giving the U.S. one of the widest income distributions among OECD members. Rupees. The U.S. ranks first in the number of dollar billionaires and millionaires, with 735 billionaires and nearly 22 million millionaires as of 2023. There were about 582,500 sheltered and unsheltered homeless persons in the U.S. in 2022, with 60% staying in an emergency shelter or transitional housing program. In 2022, 6.4 million children experienced food insecurity. Feeding America estimates that around 1 in 5, or approximately 13 million, children experience hunger in the U.S. and do not know where they will get their next meal or when. As of 2022, 37.9 million people, or 11.5% of the U.S. population, are living in poverty. The United States has a smaller welfare state and redistributes less income through government action than most other high-income countries. It is the only advanced economy that does not guarantee its workers paid vacation nationally and is one of a few countries in the world without federal paid family leave as a legal right. The United States has a higher percentage of low-income workers than almost any other developed country, largely because of a weak collective bargaining system and lack of government support for at-risk workers. Science, technology, spaceflight, and energy. Main articles, Science and Technology in the United States, Space Policy of the United States, and Energy in the United States. The United States has been a leader in technological innovation since the late 19th century and scientific research since the mid-20th century. Methods for producing interchangeable parts and the establishment of a machine tool industry enabled the large-scale manufacturing of U.S. consumer products in the late 19th century. By the early 20th century, factory electrification, the introduction of the assembly line, and other labor-saving techniques created the system of mass production. The United States is widely considered to be the leading country in the development of artificial intelligence technology. In 2022, the United States was, after China, the country with the second highest number of published scientific papers. In 2021, the U.S. ranked second, also after China, by the number of patent applications, and third by trademark and industrial design applications after China and Germany, according to World Intellectual Property Indicators. In 2023 and 2024, the United States ranked third after Switzerland and Sweden in the Global Innovation Index. The U.S. has the highest total research and development expenditure of any country and ranks ninth as a percentage of GDP. In 2023, the United States was ranked the second most technologically advanced country in the world after South Korea by Global Finance magazine. U.S. astronaut Buzz Aldrin saluting the American flag on the moon during the 1969 Apollo 11 mission. The United States is the only country that has landed crews on the lunar surface. The United States has maintained a space program since the late 1950s, beginning with the establishment of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration NASA in 1958. NASA's Apollo program 1961 to 1970 to achieve the first crewed moon landing with the 1969 Apollo 11 mission. It remains one of the agency's most significant milestones. Other major endeavors by NASA include the Space Shuttle Program 1981 to 2011, the Voyager Program 1970 to present, the Hubble and James Webb Space Telescopes launched in 1990 and 2021, respectively, and the multi-mission Mars Exploration Program Spirit and Opportunity, Curiosity, and Perseverance. NASA is one of 5 agencies collaborating on the International Space Station, ISS. 358 U.S. contributions to the ISS include several modules, including Destiny 2001, Harmony 2007, and Tranquility 2010, as well as ongoing logistical and operational support. The United States private sector dominates the global commercial spaceflight industry. 360 prominent American spaceflight contractors include Blue Origin, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and SpaceX. NASA programs such as the Commercial Crew Program, Commercial Resupply Services, Commercial Lunar Payload Services, and Next Step have facilitated growing private sector involvement in American spaceflight. As of 2023, the United States receives approximately 84% of its energy from fossil fuel, and the largest source of the country's energy came from petroleum 38%, followed by natural gas 36%, renewable sources 9%, coal 9%, and nuclear power 9%. The United States constitutes less than 4% of the world's population, but consumes around 16% of the world's energy. The U.S. ranks as the second highest emitter of greenhouse gases. Transportation in the United States, Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, serving the Atlanta metropolitan area, is the world's busiest airport by passenger traffic with over 75 million passengers in 2021. The U.S. Department of Transportation and its divisions provide regulation, supervision, and funding for all aspects of transportation except for customs, immigration, and security. The latter remain the responsibility of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Each U.S. state has its own Department of Transportation, which builds and maintains state highways. Depending upon the state, this department might also directly operate or supervise other modes of transportation. Aviation law is almost entirely the jurisdiction of the federal government. The Federal Aviation Administration regulates all aspects of civil aviation, air traffic management, certification and compliance, and aviation safety. Vehicle traffic laws, however, are enacted and enforced by state and local authorities, with the exception of roads located on federal property, such as national parks and military bases, or in the recognized U.S. territories. The United States Coast Guard is the primary enforcer of law and security on U.S. waterways, inland as well as coastal, but economic jurisdiction over coastal tidelands is shared between state and federal governments. The country's inland waterways are the world's 5th longest, totaling 41,009 kilometers, 25,482 miles. Passenger and freight rail systems, bus systems, water ferries, and dams may be under either public or private ownership and operation. U.S. civilian airlines are all privately owned. Most U.S. airports are owned and operated by local government authorities, and there are also some private airports. The Transportation Security Administration has provided security at most major airports since 2001. Interchange between Interstate 10 and Interstate 45 in Houston, Texas commercial railroads and trains were the dominant mode of transportation in the U.S. until the mid-20th century. The introduction of jet airplanes and airports serving the same major routes accelerated a decline in demand for interstate and intercity rail passenger service by the 1960s. The completion of the interstate highway system also hastened the sharp curtailment of passenger service by the railroads. These significant developments led to the creation of the National Railroad Passenger Corporation, now called Amtrak, by the U.S. federal government in 1971. Amtrak helps to maintain limited intercity rail passenger service in most parts of the country. It serves most major U.S. cities, but outside the Northeast, California, and Illinois, it typically runs only a few trains per day. More frequent Amtrak service is available in regional corridors between certain major cities, particularly the Northeast Corridor between Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, New York City, and Boston, between New York City and Albany, in metropolitan Chicago, and in parts of California and the Pacific Northwest. Amtrak does not serve several major U.S. destinations, including Las Vegas and Phoenix, Arizona. The American civil airline industry is entirely owned by corporations and has been largely deregulated since 1978. Almost major airports are publicly owned. 368. The three largest airlines in the world by passengers carried are U.S.-based. American Airlines is number one after its 2013 acquisition by U.S. Airways. 369 of the world's 50 busiest passenger airports, 16 are in the United States, including the top 5 and the busiest, Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. As of 2022, there are 19,969 airports in the U.S., of which 5,193 are designated as public use, including for general aviation and other activities. The overwhelming majority of roads in the United States are owned and maintained by state and local governments. Roads maintained only by the U.S. federal government are generally only found on federal lands, such as national parks, or at federal facilities like military bases. The interstate highway system, with its large, open freeways linking the states, is partly funded by the federal government, but owned and maintained by the state government hosting its section of the I. Interstate. Some states fund and build their own large expressways, often called parkways or turnpikes, that generally use tolls to pay for construction and maintenance. Likewise, some privately owned roads may use tolls for this purpose. Public transportation in the United States includes bus, commuter rail, ferry, and sometimes airline service. Public transit systems serve areas of higher population density where demand is greatest. Many U.S. cities, towns, and suburbs are car-dependent, however, and suburban public transit is less common and service far less frequent. Most U.S. urban areas have some form of public transit, notably city buses, while the largest, e.g. New York, Chicago, Atlanta, Philadelphia, Boston, San Francisco, and Portland, Oregon operate extensive systems that also include subways or light rail. Most public transit service in the United States is run by local governments, but national and regional commuter lines serve major U.S. urban corridors. Personal transportation in the United States is dominated by automobiles, which operate on a network of per million miles, 6 per million kilometers of public roads, making it the longest in the world. The country's rail transport network, also the longest in the world at 182,412.3 miles to 193,560 for point kilometers, of the world's 50 busiest container ports, are located in the United States, with the busiest in the U.S. being the Port of Los Angeles. The Oldsmobile Curved Dash and the Ford Model T, both American cars, are considered the first mass-produced and mass-affordable cars, respectively. As of 2023, the United States is the second-largest manufacturer of motor vehicles and is home to Tesla, the world's most valuable car company. American automotive company General Motors held the title of the world's best-selling automaker from 1931 to 2008. The United States is the world's second-largest automobile market by sales, having been overtaken by China in 2010, and the U.S. has the highest vehicle ownership per capita in the world, with 910 vehicles per 1,000 people, 389. By value, the U.S. was the world's largest importer and third-largest exporter of cars in 2022. While many languages are spoken in the United States, English is by far the most commonly spoken and written. 403. Although there is no official language at the federal level, some laws, such as U.S. naturalization requirements, standardize English, and most states have declared it the official language. 400 for 3 states and for U.S. territories have recognized local or indigenous languages in addition to English, including Hawaii Hawaiian, Alaska 20 native languages, South Dakota Sioux, American Samoa Samoan, Puerto Rico Spanish, Guam Chamorro, and the Northern Mariana Islands Carolinian and Chamorro. In total, 169 Native American languages are spoken in the United States. In Puerto Rico, Spanish is more widely spoken than English. According to the American Community Survey, 2020, for 110 some 245 million people in the U.S. age 5 and older spoke only English at home. About 41.2 million spoke Spanish at home, making it the second most commonly used language. Other languages spoken at home by 1 million people or more include Chinese 3.40 million, Tagalog 1.71 million, Vietnamese 1.52 million, Arabic 1.39 million, French 1.18 million, Korean 1.07 million, and Russian 1.04 million. German, spoken by 1 million people at home in 2010, fell to 857,000 total speakers in 2020. Immigration Maine article. Immigration to the United States. The Mexico-United States border wall between San Diego left and Tijuana right America's immigrant population is by far the world's largest. In absolute terms, in 2022, there were 87.7 million immigrants and U.S.-born children of immigrants in the United States, accounting for nearly 27% of the overall U.S. population, 414. In 2017, out of the U.S. foreign-born population, some 45%, 20.7 million, were naturalized citizens, 27%, 12.3 million, were lawful permanent residents, 6% to 0.2 million were temporary lawful residents, and 23%, 10.5 million, were unauthorized immigrants. In 2019, the top countries of origin for immigrants were Mexico 24% of immigrants, India 6%, China 5%, the Philippines for 0.5%, and El Salvador 3%. In fiscal year 2022, over 1 million immigrants, most of whom entered through family reunification, were granted legal residence. In fiscal year 2020 alone, according to the Migration Policy Institute, the United States resettled 100,030 for refugees, which cements the United States' role as the top global resettlement destination, far surpassing other major resettlement countries in Europe and Canada. Religion Maine article. Religion in the United States. The template pie chart is being considered for merging. Religious affiliation in the U.S. According to a 2023 Gallup poll, Protestantism 33%, Catholicism 22%, non-specific Christian 11%, Judaism 2%, Mormonism 1%, other religions 6%, unaffiliated 22%, unanswered 3%. The First Amendment guarantees the free exercise of religion in the country and forbids Congress from passing laws respecting its establishment. Religious practice is widespread, among the most diverse in the world, and profoundly vibrant. The country has the world's largest Christian population. Other notable faiths include Judaism, Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, many New Age movements, and Native American religions. Religious practice varies significantly by region. Ceremonial deism is common in American culture. The overwhelming majority of Americans believe in a higher power or spiritual force, engage in spiritual practices such as prayer, and consider themselves religious or spiritual. In the Bible Belt, located within the southern United States, evangelical Protestantism plays a significant role culturally, whereas New England and the western United States tend to be more secular. Mormonism, a restorationist movement, whose members migrated westward from Missouri and Illinois under the leadership of Brigham Young in 1847 after the assassination of Joseph Smith, remains the predominant religion in Utah to this day. The United States of America, USA, commonly known as the United States, U.S. or America, is a country primarily located in North America. It is a federal union of 50 states and a federal capital district, Washington, D.C. The 48 contiguous states border Canada to the north and Mexico to the south, with the semi-exclavic state of Alaska in the northwest and the archipelagic state of Hawaii in the Pacific Ocean. The United States also asserts sovereignty over 5 major island territories and various uninhabited islands. J. The country has the world's third-largest land area D and third-largest population, exceeding 340 million. K. The U.S. also possesses the world's second-largest exclusive economic zone. Its 3 largest metropolitan areas are New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago, and its 3 most populous states are California, Texas, and Florida. Paleo-Indians migrated to North America across the Bering Land Bridge more than 12,000 years ago and formed various civilizations and societies. Spanish exploration and colonization led to the establishment in 1513 of Spanish Florida, the first European colony in what is now the continental United States. France's colony of French Florida was destroyed by the Spaniards, and permanent French colonies were founded much later. Subsequent British colonization led to the first settlement of the 13 colonies in Virginia in 1607. L. The development of intensive agriculture in the rapidly expanding colonies soon led to the forced migration of enslaved Africans. Clashes with the British Crown over taxation and political representation sparked the American Revolution, with the Second Continental Congress formally declaring independence on July 4, 1776. Following its victory in the 1775 to 1783 Revolutionary War, the country continued to expand westward across North America, resulting in the dispossession of native inhabitants. As more states were admitted, a North-South division over slavery led to the secession of the Confederate States of America, which fought the Union in the 1861 to 1865 American Civil War. With the victory and preservation of the United States, slavery was abolished nationally. By 1900, the country had established itself as a great power, a status solidified after its involvement in World War I after Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941. The U.S. entered World War II. Its aftermath left the U.S. and the Soviet Union as the world's two superpowers and led to the Cold War, during which both countries struggled for ideological dominance and international influence. Following the Soviet Union's collapse and the end of the Cold War in 1991, the U.S. emerged as the world's sole superpower, wielding significant geopolitical influence globally. The U.S. national government is a presidential constitutional federal republic and liberal democracy with 3 separate branches: legislative, executive, and judicial. It has a bicameral national legislature composed of the House of Representatives, a lower house based on population, and the Senate, an upper house based on equal representation for each state. Federalism provides substantial autonomy to the 50 states, while American values are based on a democratic political tradition that draws its inspiration from the European Enlightenment movement. One of the world's most developed countries, the United States has had the largest nominal GDP since about 1890 and accounted for over 15% of the global economy in 2023. It possesses by far the largest amount of wealth of any country and has the highest disposable household income per capita among OECD countries, but has high levels of wealth and income inequality. The U.S. ranks among the world's highest in economic competitiveness, productivity, innovation, human rights, and higher education. Its hard power and cultural influence have a global reach. The U.S. is a founding member of the World Bank, the Organization of American States, NATO, and the United Nations, as well as a permanent member of the UN Security Council. Sports in the United States and United States at the Olympics. American football is the most popular sport in the United States in this September 2020 National Football League game. The Jacksonville Jaguars play the Washington Commanders at FedEx Field. The most popular spectator sports in the U.S. are American football, basketball, baseball, soccer, and ice hockey. 610. While most major U.S. sports, such as baseball and American football, have evolved out of European practices, basketball, volleyball, skateboarding, and snowboarding are American inventions, many of which have become popular worldwide. Lacrosse and surfing arose from Native American and Native Hawaiian activities that predate European contact. The market for professional sports in the United States was approximately $69 billion in July 2013, roughly 50% larger than that of all of Europe, the Middle East, and Africa combined. American football is by several measures the most popular spectator sport in the United States. The National Football League has the highest average attendance of any sports league in the world, and the Super Bowl is watched by tens of millions globally. However, baseball has been regarded as the U.S. national sport since the late 19th century. After American football, the next for most popular professional team sports are basketball, baseball, soccer, and ice hockey. Their premier leagues are, respectively, the National Basketball Association, Major League Baseball, Major League Soccer, and the National Hockey League. The most watched individual sports in the U.S. are golf and auto racing, particularly NASCAR and IndyCar. On the collegiate level, earnings for the member institutions exceed $1 billion annually, 618, and college football and basketball attract large audiences, as the NCAA March Madness tournament and the college football playoff are some of the most watched national sporting events. 619. In the U.S., the intercollegiate sports level serves as a feeder system for professional sports. This differs greatly from practices in nearly all other countries, where publicly and privately funded sports organizations serve this function. 8 Olympic Games have taken place in the United States. The 1904 Summer Olympics in St. Louis, Missouri, were the first ever Olympic Games held outside of Europe. The Olympic Games will be held in the U.S. for a 9th time when Los Angeles hosts the 2028 Summer Olympics. U.S. athletes have won a total of 2,968 medals, 1,179 gold, at the Olympic Games. In international professional competition, the U.S. men's national soccer team has qualified for 11 World Cups, while the women's national team has won the FIFA Women's World Cup and Olympic soccer tournament 4 times each. The United States hosted the 1990 FIFA World Cup and will co-host, along with Canada and Mexico, the 2026 FIFA World Cup. The 1999 FIFA Women's World Cup was also hosted by the United States. Its final match was watched by 90,185, setting the world record for most attended women's sporting event at the time. Thanks for watching. The United States is well known for its theater. Mainstream theater in the United States derives from the old European theatrical tradition and has been heavily influenced by the British theater. By the middle of the 19th century, America had created new distinct dramatic forms in the Tom shows, the showboat theater, and the minstrel show. The central hub of the American theater scene is the Theater District in Manhattan, with its divisions of Broadway, Off-Broadway, and Off-Off-Broadway. Many movie and television celebrities have gotten their big break working in New York productions. Outside New York City, many cities have professional regional or resident theater companies that produce their own seasons. The biggest budget theatrical productions are musicals. U.S. theater has an active community theater culture. The Tony Awards recognizes excellence in live Broadway theater and are presented at an annual ceremony in Manhattan. The awards are given for Broadway productions and performances. One is also given for regional theater. Several discretionary non-competitive awards are given as well, including a special Tony Award, the Tony Honors for Excellence in Theater, and the Isabel Stevenson Award. Visual Arts Maine articles, Visual Art of the United States, and Architecture of the United States. American Gothic 1930 by Grant Wood is one of the most famous American paintings and is widely parodied. 535 folk art in colonial America grew out of artisanal craftsmanship in communities that allowed commonly trained people to individually express themselves. It was distinct from Europe's tradition of high art, which was less accessible and generally less relevant to early American settlers. Cultural movements in art and craftsmanship in colonial America generally lagged behind those of Western Europe. For example, the prevailing medieval style of woodworking and primitive sculpture became integral to early American folk art. Despite the emergence of Renaissance styles in England in the late 16th and early 17th centuries, the New English styles would have been early enough to make a considerable impact on American folk art, but American styles and forms had already been firmly adopted. Not only did styles change slowly in early America, but there was a tendency for rural artisans there to continue their traditional forms longer than their urban counterparts did and far longer than Those in Western Europe. The Hudson River School was a mid-19th century movement in the visual arts tradition of European naturalism. The 1913 Armory Show in New York City, an exhibition of European modernist art, shocked the public and transformed the U.S. art scene. Georgia O'Keeffe, Marston Hartley, and others experimented with new and individualistic styles, which would become known as American modernism. Major artistic movements, such as the abstract expressionism of Jackson Pollock and Willem D. Kooning and the pop art of Andy Warhol and Roy Lichtenstein, developed largely in the United States. Major photographers include Alfred Stieglitz, Edward Steichen, Dorothea Lange, Edward Weston, James Van der Zee, Ansel Adams, and Gordon Parks. The tide of modernism and then postmodernism has brought global fame to American architects, including Frank Lloyd Wright, Philip Johnson, and Frank Gehry. The Metropolitan Museum of Art in Manhattan is the largest art museum in the United States, 540, and the fourth largest in the world. Music Maine article. Music of the United States. American folk music encompasses numerous music genres, variously known as traditional music, traditional folk music, contemporary folk music, or roots music. Many traditional songs have been sung within the same family or folk group for generations, and sometimes trace back to such origins as the British Isles, mainland Europe, or Africa. The rhythmic and lyrical styles of African American music, in particular, have influenced American music. Banjos were brought to America through the slave trade. Minstrel shows incorporating the instrument into their acts led to its increased popularity and widespread production in the 19th century. The electric guitar, first invented in the 1930s and mass-produced by the 1940s, had an enormous influence on popular music, in particular due to the development of rock and roll. The Country Music Hall of Fame and Museum in Nashville, Tennessee, elements from folk idioms such as the blues and old-time music were adopted and transformed into popular genres with global audiences. Jazz grew from blues and ragtime in the early 20th century developing from the innovations and recordings of composers such as W.C. Handy and Jelly Roll Morton. Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington increased its popularity early in the 20th century. Country music developed in the 1920s, rock and roll in the 1930s, 546, and bluegrass and rhythm and blues in the 1940s. In the 1960s, Bob Dylan emerged from the folk revival to become one of the country's most celebrated songwriters. The musical forms of punk and hip-hop both originated in the United States in the 1970s. The United States has the world's largest music market with a total retail value of $15.9 billion in 2022. Most of the world's major record companies are based in the U.S. They are represented by the Recording Industry Association of America, RIAA. Mid-20th century American pop stars, such as Frank Sinatra and Elvis Presley, became global celebrities and best-selling music artists, as have artists of the late 20th century, such as Michael Jackson, Madonna, Whitney Houston, and Mariah Carey, and the early 21st century, such as Eminem, Britney Spears, 562, Lady Gaga, Katy Perry, Taylor Swift, and Beyoncé. Fashion Mind article. Fashion in the United States shot couture fashion models on the catwalk during New York Fashion Week. The United States is the world's largest apparel market by revenue. Apart from professional business attire, American fashion is eclectic and predominantly informal. Americans' diverse cultural roots are reflected in their clothing. However, sneakers, jeans, t-shirts, and baseball caps are emblematic of American styles. New York, with its Fashion Week, is considered to be one of the big for global fashion capitals, along with Paris, Milan, and London. A study demonstrated that general proximity to Manhattan's garment district has been synonymous with American fashion since its inception in the early 20th century. The headquarters of many designer labels reside in Manhattan. Labels cater to niche markets, such as preteens. New York Fashion Week is one of the most influential fashion weeks in the world, and it occurs twice a year. While the annual Met Gala in Manhattan is commonly known as the fashion world's biggest night. Cinema Maine article. Cinema of the United States' iconic Hollywood sign in the Hollywood Hills, often regarded as the symbol of the American film industry. The U.S. film industry has a worldwide influence and following. Hollywood, a district in northern Los Angeles, the nation's second most populous city, is also metonymus for the American filmmaking industry. The major film studios of the United States are the primary source of the most commercially successful and most ticket-selling movies in the world. Since the early 20th century, the U.S. film industry has largely been based in and around Hollywood, although in the 21st century, an increasing number of films are not made there, and film companies have been subject to the forces of globalization. The Academy Awards, popularly known as the Oscars, have been held annually by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences since 1929, and the Golden Globe Awards have been held annually since January 1944. The industry peaked in what is commonly referred to as the Golden Age of Hollywood, from the early sound period until the early 1960s, with screen actors such as John Wayne and Marilyn Monroe becoming iconic figures. In the 1970s, New Hollywood, or the Hollywood Renaissance, was defined by grittier films influenced by French and Italian realist pictures of the post-war period. The 21st century has been marked by the rise of American streaming platforms, which came to rival traditional cinema.